There's a fishing town on the Black Sea coast that used to be invisible, not hidden, erased. Balaclava didn't exist on Soviet maps. No train stopped there officially. No foreigners could enter without special clearance. 1,000 people lived and worked inside it, and as far as the outside world knew, none of them existed at all. The reason was carved into the mountain behind the harbor, an underground shipyard built to hide nuclear-armed submarines from spy satellites and survive a direct atomic strike. When the Cold War ended, nobody demolished it. It was stripped, looted, left to flood in the dark. What's inside is stranger than what it was built for. Look at the cliff face first. From the water, it's just rock. Turquoise sea, dry Crimean hills, nothing unusual. Then a gap appears, a canal mouth cut straight into the mountain, and the water simply keeps going, disappearing into darkness under solid stone. This is Object 825 GTS, built between 1957 and 1961 under Mount Tavros, at the height of Cold War paranoia, when both superpowers treated nuclear exchange less like a possibility and more like a matter of scheduling. Inside, a floodlit concrete channel runs clean through the rock, wide enough for a submarine to pass fully submerged, hidden from satellites the moment it entered. 2 entrances, one facing the open sea, one facing the bay, so a submarine could slip in from either direction without ever surfacing where a camera in orbit might catch it. Inside the mountain, a dry dock for repairs, torpedo assembly halls, warhead storage rooms, blast doors reportedly weighing many tons each, corridors wide enough to move munitions along rails deep inside solid rock. The whole complex was engineered to take a direct hit from an atomic bomb and keep functioning. The exact tolerance is still debated among historians, but the intent behind it was never subtle. Some reports suggest it could shelter thousands of personnel alongside the fleet itself, an entire hidden city sealed inside a mountain. This wasn't a shelter. It was a fortress meant to outlive the very war it was built to fight. Here's the twist. By the time the tunnels were finished, the weapons they were built to protect were already changing shape. Submarine technology moved fast. Missile ranges grew longer. Warheads became smaller, more mobile, less dependent on a single hardened harbor buried in a cliff. The kind of war Object 825 was designed to survive kept slipping further out of date year after year, even as the concrete kept curing beneath the mountain. It was built as the ultimate second strike hiding place, and it became, slowly and expensively, an answer to a question the future had already stopped asking by the time it was finished. Then came 1993. Ukraine was independent. Russian forces pulled out almost overnight. Balaclava's secret shipyard, one of the most classified facilities in the entire Soviet Union, was simply abandoned. No ceremony, no formal decommissioning, just an empty tunnel and a town that could finally appear on a map again after decades of erasure. Looters stripped it for scrap metal within a few years. Copper wiring, machinery, anything with resale value pulled straight out of the walls and hauled away. Water crept into the lower levels. Fluorescent lights went dark for good, one section at a time. Then, in the early 2000s, someone had a very different idea. Turn the ruin into a museum. Today, you can walk the same tunnel where nuclear-armed submarines once slipped past satellite tracking, underlighting installed for tour groups instead of naval crews, past torpedo racks that once held enough force to answer an entire war. But Balaclava wasn't only a submarine base. A few hundred meters along the same stretch of coast, the Soviets built something meant to make sure no enemy fleet ever got close enough to find it in the first place. On a cliff top above the same harbor stands Object 100, the Sarich Coastal Missile Complex. Rusting launch rails still point permanently out to sea, aimed at a horizon that never delivered what they were built to intercept. Built in the 1950s, this was Soviet coastal defense in its most literal form. Anti-ship missiles ready to destroy an approaching aircraft carrier before it ever came within striking range of Crimea's coastline. Underground bunkers held the crews, the guidance systems, the launch controls, an entire hidden war machine buried beneath a cliff top that, from above, looks almost peaceful today. Crews trained here for decades. Missiles were tested and maintained on a constant rotation, kept combat ready year after year, and not one of them was ever fired at a real target. The invasion scenario, the whole complex, was built around simply never arrived. After the Soviet collapse, Object 100 was decommissioned and left to the coastal weather. Some sections are explored by visitors today, officially listed in disrepair, with access shifting depending on who happens to be watching that particular year. A weapon engineered to stop a war that never came, still permanently aimed at nothing but open water. Locals reportedly still refer to the site by its old military designation, decades after it stopped mattering to anyone in uniform. The bunkers nearby, once climate-controlled to protect sensitive guidance electronics, now sit open to rain and salt air, slowly losing a fight against the exact coastline they were built to defend. That was a fortress with a mission. The next site had a mission too, except the world around it changed nationality before the paint had even finished drying. Head north into what used to be East Germany, and you'll find a forest quietly swallowing an entire abandoned city. Birch trees push up through cracked parade grounds. Faded murals of Lenin peel off crumbling barracks walls in the rain. Windows hang open on buildings nobody has entered in decades. This is Vogelsang, a self-contained Soviet garrison city built to house tens of thousands of troops, complete with its own schools, a theater, apartment blocks, sports facilities, and, reportedly, storage for nuclear-capable missiles tucked among the ordinary housing. It was built for permanence. A version of the future in which Soviet forces stayed in Central Europe indefinitely, generation after generation, raising families inside a small city built just for them, insulated entirely from the country surrounding it. Then German reunification happened, and the troops left almost overnight in the early 1990s. Vogelsang wasn't sold, redeveloped, or fenced off for long. It was simply left standing, as if the people who built it assumed they would eventually come back. No major reconstruction ever followed. Nature did, slowly, what no demolition crew ever got around to doing. Today it's one of the largest abandoned military cities in all of Europe that you can actually walk into freely. An entire town built for an occupation that ended before its own buildings had time to properly age. Urban explorers describe entire apartments still holding furniture, children's school books left mid-lesson, gas masks hanging on hooks in what used to be a civil defense classroom. Whether every object found here dates back to the original withdrawal or arrived later is by most honest accounts impossible to fully verify. What isn't disputed is the scale. An entire self-sufficient garrison town, built to outlast a political order that collapsed within a single generation. One abandoned Soviet complex was left to rot in total silence. The next one was turned into something almost nobody expects. 65 meters below the streets of central Moscow, an old Soviet elevator still drops straight down into the dark. At the bottom, Bunker 42, the Tagansky Protected Command Point, built in the early 1950s as a hardened command center for Soviet leadership and long-range aviation control, the exact place from which, in theory, a nuclear war would have been directed and fought. Blast doors seal it off entirely from the rest of the city above, a preserved command hall still lined with old telephone banks and yellowing wall maps, corridors built to keep a government alive underground while the surface burned above them. It was designed for the single worst day in modern human history, engineered down to the last detail of its ventilation system. That day never came. As tensions eased through the later decades of the Cold War, and technology moved past what the bunker had originally been built to coordinate, it was quietly decommissioned, its function absorbed into newer, far more mobile command systems elsewhere. And then, this is the part that lands hardest, it was declassified, sold off, and reportedly repurposed in part as a museum and private event space. The same halls, engineered to run an entire country through nuclear apocalypse, have, at various points, hosted private functions and guided tours for curious paying tourists. A bunker built to survive the end of the world, rented out instead for an evening. Balaclava and Moscow's bunker were both hidden underground for war. The next site wasn't Soviet at all. It belonged to the very country the USSR had built all of this to hide from. In the Arizona desert, There's a hole in the ground with a real intercontinental ballistic missile still sitting inside it, exactly where it was placed decades ago. This is the Titan Missile Museum, built during the Cold War as one of dozens of hardened silos scattered across the American Southwest, each one holding a Titan II missile ready to launch a nuclear warhead within minutes of a presidential order. Underground, the launch complex mirrors the same basic logic as Balaclava. Blast doors, hardened concrete, systems engineered to keep functioning after everything above ground had already been destroyed. This was the American answer to everything Balaclava represented. Mutually assured destruction, made entirely physical, buried in concrete on opposite sides of the planet at the same time. In the 1980s, arms reduction treaties took these silos offline one after another. But instead of destroying this particular site, the missile was deliberately deactivated and left sitting in place, its blast door propped permanently open a few feet, a treaty requirement, so that satellites could confirm from orbit that it would never be fired again. Now it's a museum. Visitors walk down into the silo, past a preserved control room where two operators once needed to turn separate keys simultaneously to authorize a launch, a safeguard designed specifically to prevent a single person from ending the world alone. They stand next to the same button-ready weapon that once stood, in theory, directly opposite the very submarines hidden inside Balaclava's mountain. Two sides of the exact same standoff, decades later, both now quietly selling tickets to strangers. Every site so far was built for a war that never actually came. The last stop wasn't military at all. It was a town abandoned for a completely different reason entirely. Far above the Arctic Circle, on the Norwegian island of Svalbard, there's a Soviet town frozen in place like a photograph nobody ever developed. Apartment blocks stand in perfect, undisturbed rows. A bust of Lenin faces a glacier, reportedly the northernmost statue of him ever built anywhere on Earth. A swimming pool and a cultural hall sit exactly as they were left, furniture still in place, wallpaper still on the walls, sheet music reportedly still open on a piano stand inside the concert hall. This is Pyramiden, built by the Soviet Union as a model coal mining settlement in one of the most remote inhabited places on the planet, meant to show Soviet industrial and cultural achievement thriving, even where almost nothing else could survive the climate. There is no war here, no collapse of an ideology, no funding suddenly cut off by revolution. Pyramiden was abandoned in 1998 for a far quieter reason. The coal mine simply stopped being profitable to run. The entire population left within a matter of weeks, taking almost nothing with them, as if they fully expected to return again the following season. And because nothing here decays the way it does almost anywhere else on Earth, no aggressive vegetation, no scrappers passing through for scrap metal, just cold, dry Arctic air working far slower than time does anywhere warmer, Pyramiden has been preserved almost perfectly, entirely by accident, not protected, just frozen, a Soviet dream of total permanence, kept intact for reasons that have nothing whatsoever to do with anyone actually wanting it that way. Every one of these places held the exact shape of a future that never actually happened. And the strangest of them all is still the one carved directly into a mountain back in Crimea. Go back to Balaclava now. The tunnel is still there, exactly as it was. The water still moves in and out of the canal exactly as it did when submarines slid silently through it in total secrecy, unseen by satellites, unseen by the outside world, unseen even by the map itself for decades. The blast doors that were built to seal shut against a nuclear strike are propped open now, permanently, for tour groups instead of naval crews on active duty. Fluorescent lights flicker against concrete poured for a war that ultimately never came. Tourists photograph torpedo racks where live warheads were once assembled by men whose names were never recorded anywhere public, in a town that officially did not exist. None of these places were ever built to become strange. They were built to be permanent, absolute, unquestionable, engineered to outlast the entire century that produced them. The enemy disappeared. The ideology collapsed. The coal ran out. The funding dried up completely. The technology moved on long before the concrete had even finished curing in some of these places. But the structures themselves stayed exactly where they were poured, waiting for a future that kept quietly changing its mind without ever telling them. The future they were built for never arrived, but the tunnels did. And somewhere under that Crimean cliff tonight, the water is still moving through the mountain, exactly the way it always has, as if it's still patiently waiting for something to come home.